Hello and welcome to On the Kerbs. I'm your host, Team Hours Daily. Joining me this week is Motorsport podcast host Freya Brolsma. We caught up recently for a lengthy chat about her podcasting origins with the Lakeside Drive Podcast, how she came to join the official Extreme E podcast, as well as the McLaren Applied Podcast, her thoughts on women in motorsport and how this area has evolved over time and how it can and must improve in the future, and a whole lot more. It's a really in-depth chat that was a lot of fun to record. So, without any further ado, let's just get straight into it. I hope you enjoy our conversation. Hi Freya, thank you very much for being here today. Welcome onto the podcast. How are you?
Thank you. It's good to see you. Going really well. I can't believe that it's already the end of January. That's kind of blowing my mind a little bit. But yeah, everything just seems to be whizzing by. But very excited for the year ahead.
Excellent stuff. Happy to hear that everything's going well. And yeah, January, I don't know where that went. It was also incredibly long, but I think that's just what we're going to have to deal with this year.
Yeah, seems that way.
First question I like to ask everyone that I talk to on here is, what first got you interested in motorsport?
Yeah, so I think it's funny for me. Like I've always loved sport, all sport. And growing up, I think often you don't really have much of a choice with that. We are kind of a sporting nation. But for me, it was predominantly kind of rowing and athletics and footy, and there's a bit of rugby in there, cricket, like kind of anything goes really. And I tried my hand at all of it. Motorsport was never part of it though, which is probably a combination of where I grew up in Tasmania. There is a motorsport community there, but it's a small place anyway. And when you hear a lot of people asking about how they got into motorsport, it would be I sat down and watched Formula One with my dad or something like that. It just wasn't in our family. No one really watched F1 or any other type of motorsport. So it's not something that I grew up with or was particularly knew anything about. And it wasn't until I moved to Melbourne to go to Melbourne for university, and I went to Melbourne University, which is kind of just north of the city, but not actually that far from Albert Park. And this was, back in 2011 or so, 2011. So you could still hear the cars from 10 Ks away. And I was standing in the middle of the uni and I could hear this noise and sounded like mosquitoes basically. But it had been constant like all day. And I was like, what is that noise? And they were like, oh, F1's on. And I was like, what's F1? And that's literally how I learned about it. It was like, I have this like constant mozzie in my ear. Is it just me who can hear this? And then I kind of learned a bit about it. And then it's very common. I think everyone's at uni trying to get work and catering work and that type of thing just to earn some money, and ended up doing a bit of work for one of the catering companies that host a lot of the big events there, including F1. So my first experience at a track was like running boxes back and forth, but I was a runner from like one of the catering things out to the back of the kitchen. So not the most glamorous first experience, but it's just one of those something like I then, yeah, exactly. I can tell you that that's not the best place to watch a race from. But yeah, I think I kind of was in and out of it a little bit, knew about it. Obviously when Daniel Ricciardo started racing, Australia kind of just got very excited about that. Mark Webber beforehand, but I think I kind of got into it in the Daniel Ricciardo era, so to speak, and lead up to that.
If only you had some merchandise at hand to prove that, though. The one time.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I can give you lots of other merchandise. Hold on, this is a podcast, so this is probably not great content, but I don't know, there's one hat, another hat. I do have an old, I've got an old Renault t-shirt from his days there. But yeah, and then look, I think like a lot of people, I kind of took a bit of a hiatus. I kind of fell out of love with the sport, and then come drive to type and everything else, it did hook me again. I think it opened up the sport a little bit for me. And the other thing was that there were a lot of people were talking about it, and I was like, oh, people actually want to talk about this now. It wasn't a cool thing before now. And all of a sudden you've got people around you to talk to about it and that kind of thing. So I kind of revived my interest in the sport and actually kind of probably took it to another level.
It's kind of funny that it's kind of the older F1 kind of engines that are responsible for you essentially being here today and everything that's happened since then, and just shows how important that sound was and why they need to kind of fix that in some way for moving forward, because it's something as chance as that led to all of this, which is just mad to think that.
It's yeah, oh totally, but it's like it was such a kind of visceral experience when you heard those cars, and I don't
especially
think
from so far away.
Oh, completely. I was like, this is literally like 10 Ks away. There was an element of fascination in there, and you could kind of feel it in your bones. It was very different to the experience that we have now. We were in Montreal last year, and I think like the Porsche Cup racing beforehand was louder than Formula One cars.
Oh, yeah, we move on quickly from that. I don't like that thought. But you're saying about how Drive to Survive kind of led to your re-falling back in love with it and being able to talk with people more about it, which is obviously now what you do an awful lot of, which is great because we love hearing from you about it all. So I want to know, how did you get involved with Lakeside Drive, the F1 podcast?
Yeah, so my involvement with Lakeside Drive, I think, really tells a story of kind of online communities and what it is that creators are really doing when they put their content out into the world on those various platforms. Because basically, yeah, I mean, I was looking for more F1 content that was international. And to be clear, when I say international, I actually mean non-British. Apologies for that. But it is just it's where most of the content, English speaking, that is produced tends to come from. And I was looking for something a bit different, and came across Lakeside Drive, and I listened to it for quite some time, and then eventually joined their Discord. And because I kind of felt like I was missing out on something. They'd talk about it on the podcast, and they would refer to people there or jokes there or things that are going on. And I was like, I feel like I'm missing a part of this kind of being part of this community maybe. And that was a great decision, because not only is it a super kind of welcoming, funny, just, great kind of environment, online environment to be in, but as you may or may not surprise you, I was not in the majority in terms of being a female in that group. And the hosts actually reached out to me and they said, hey, we'd really like your opinion, basically, when it comes to being a listener of the podcast who is a female between a non-disclosed age bracket, and being part of this online community, like both in listening to it, but then being part of that group with the other listeners and hosts as well. Now, they didn't know at the time in asking me that is that I'm also a psychologist by trade, in organizational psychology. And a lot of what I kind of reflect on when I'm listening either to podcasts or looking at different online communities and things like that is really thinking about, why am I so hooked by this? Or why is that going so well and that's not going so well and everything else? So I basically wrote this whole list of things upon reflection of the human condition in terms of saying, like, I think this is what you're doing really well. Your community, all these types of things, and these are some ideas that I might have, and part of that was looking for ways to actually really engage with their listeners on a one-on-one way, so you really feel part of the platform, basically, and quite personally invested in it. You can do things like run competitions or get them on to your podcast every now and then, and they say, great, what are you doing on Sunday? And so I think it was the must have been it was a Texas weekend, post qualifying, kind of like warm up show basically they would do. And so I went on to my first time there in October last year, and then we did a couple more, and then in 2022.
It seems like so much longer ago that you've
I
been
know.
involved
I was trying to think about the timeline in my head. I was like, yeah, it was in October 2021, which is very strange to think about, having been doing it for a year with them now. In 2022, come and be a full-time panelist as one of our hosts. So I just think it's a really, to me, I think it's an interesting story, because I think it actually really speaks to the bigger picture as to what you're doing. Like I said, when you create a platform, create content and put it out into the world, like that's what you're building. You're building connection with people all over the place, who have this shared passion and have an opportunity for them to become involved in all sorts of different ways, which is really cool.
No, definitely. And it's, I mean, you summed it up perfectly. I was trying to think about a way of kind of coming with that, but you kind of took everything that I was going to say about that.
I'll use all the words first.
Been doing this a while. But in terms of, again, you kind of used that as, not to be offending Lakeside Drive here, but like training wheels in a sense, because again, it's an Australian podcast where a lot of people do listen to it, but it's not a global thing yet. I mean, if we know James, it's going to head that way sooner or later. But it's led to some pretty awesome opportunities in what is a relatively short time frame in terms of a motorsport-related career, because you ended up being a co-host then last year for the Extreme E podcast, and then getting to do a really niche, but what I found to be a very enjoyable and the only podcast I binged in like 2 days last year, podcasting the McLaren Applied Podcast. So how was that kind of a jumping off point for you with Lakeside Drive, or how did you get involved with that? Because again, you said a lot of this stuff has to do with connections and just working hard and showing what you're presenting there, but at the same time, you still need to get these people to say yes to you. So I'm interested how those two in particular came about.
Yeah, well, I will say that Lakeside Drive is more international than we expect sometimes. When you look at the data in terms of our listenership, we can't understand why we had so many listeners in Russia at one point in time. And we had a great experience last year, which was going to meet some of our listeners from the US. Actually, we got to go and meet them in Miami. They were all there for the Grand Prix.
International celebrity.
Them there. Oh yeah, look, I say international, just like woman of mystery. But we love all our American listeners too. We have a few dotted around. But yeah, look, Extreme E and McLaren Applied were two very, very different kind of experiences. I have to give all credit to just the formulation of the Extreme E podcast, Off Track, to James Baldwin, who just did what it has a story that is not dissimilar from a lot of opportunities that kind of came out in terms of sending off an email and them saying okay, basically. So he did the first series with Michael Laminato, and then I joined them last year. And it's been and that's obviously off the back of spending some time working, having met them both and working with them as well. Then say, okay, come and join us on this, which is, as you said, it is a step up. This is somebody else saying, come and create and produce content for us to help us to bring people into the Extreme E story, and to share, our journey as a racing series with them. It is very different to, having creative freedom with your own work. But from an Extreme E perspective, like, I've enjoyed that more than I ever thought that I would. Not that I didn't think that I would enjoy it, but I just didn't know what to expect, put it that way. And I'm newer to off-road racing categories in comparison to things like Formula One. But as a series, like, oh my God, it has everything. And when you watch it, it's kind of went in going, oh, wow, this thing is like bumper cars for like actual massive cars. And they're huge. Like, when we were at MTC and you saw the McLaren one day, I was like, this thing is massive. It's ridiculous. Anyway, but when you actually started watching it, I was like, wait a second. This is a racing series that all in one go, you've got rookies, you've got world champions across like multiple racing categories, men, women, drivers from different nationalities, racing backgrounds, everything in epic locations all over the world. And ultimately, what is really important, obviously, great racing. And like, at the end of the day, you go, like, what more can you want? And then you can say, well, actually, the whole concept is centered around what is currently and will continue to be two of the most important topics to like dig into, which is climate change and equality. And I think, I've learned so much in doing it about the sport, about all the topics that they talk about, from Michael, from James as well. And we have such a great time creating that content, obviously in the form of podcasts with Michael and James. But it's been so fun, and you learn so much along the way, and we've been able to meet some awesome people as well. Andrew Coley, Jenny Gow, and Laura Winter, who went over and interviewed last year along with several of the drivers. And, they're all just great people. They are down to earth, kind, hardworking people who are passionate about what they do. And I think that's something that's really, really special about this sport, because it's not something you get into unless you are really passionate about it and committed to kind of what it is there for or there to achieve. So very different to Lakeside Drive. We try to keep some of the fun Australian banter in there, but there is also, a slightly different message as well. So that's been really great.
Definitely comes across sometimes if you listen to both of them, especially back to back sometimes, which has happened. Where
that's a lot of Australia.
that is. Then you do a break for a week or so, but it's fine. Where you're very much that's them in professional mode. Not that Lakeside Drive professional, but it's like, yeah, I can see. You can kind of tell or get an idea of when they rein themselves in a little bit, or when you decide to just leave it there on one thing and not say some more of it.
Leave it there is probably a good term for it. Look, you've got to know you've got different audiences on both of those podcasts, and you're there for a different reason as well. And like I said, when you've got total creative freedom, not that we don't really with Extreme E, but at the same time, you've got to be probably elevate the professionalism a little bit.
There's more of a brand there with other things involved, whereas Lakeside Drive, it is yours. You can. It's about us.
Exactly. It's just that idea of going, one is your brand and one is not, and you've got to respect that, which is really important. And you'll hear anybody who works as a freelancer, I think in any industry, kind of saying, you've got to respect the brand that you're working with and or for, and what it is that they want to achieve through that product. So, but at the same time, got to be authentic. And I think hopefully that is something that you can pick up on when you very concerningly to me listen to both back to back. Go, no, this is them. That this is.
I don't make the weekend schedules for the races. When I have to listen to it on a Monday, that's when I have to get through it.
Yeah. Well, luckily there's not that many Extreme E races, so you don't have to put up with us too much. But yeah, like I said, you've got to be considerate of what it is that you're there to do, but also bring your whole self. And everyone who I've spoken to and try and learn from, who has been doing this type of work and presenting work as well and everything else for much, much longer than I have, that is one of the first things that they'll say or attribute to the moment for them that they became more comfortable in what they're doing, is going, the second I just remembered to be me is when I kind of felt it all click into place. So I'm really trying to kind of take that message on board and go, respect the boundaries, but just be yourself. And I think I hope that comes across with the Extreme E podcast, and you can kind of tell, because Lakeside Drive is a free-for-all. So
well, I think that authenticity and the originality then go really hand in hand. And for me, you could really tell that with the McLaren Applied podcast as well, because not only was it shining a spotlight on areas of motorsport where you wouldn't really get to see unless you're an absolute diehard fan, and even then you'd have to really go looking for something and probably only be able to read about it then. But say that last episode where you were talking to just the women involved in various different things behind the scenes there, it's like, where else would you get that? And that is the hook you need to get people in there. And if chances are, if people have listened to the other however many episodes it was before, then they'll listen to this one. And it's about keep pushing that out there even more. And it's nice that you got that opportunity and you're able to use that in such a way there.
Yeah, McLaren Applied was quite a different kettle of fish. They really wanted to kind of tell their story and invite people in to learn about what they actually do as a business, because I think not many people really know who McLaren Applied are. I think a lot of people are very familiar with McLaren.
You hear
as a
of
brand.
it, but you couldn't tell what they actually do.
But as soon as you said, like, what's the difference between McLaren Applied and McLaren's brand, people will struggle to articulate that. And that was really important to them, to be able to tell their own story, what they do, what their goals are, and to hear from their people as well. And, again, it shows what such a valuable kind of platform this is, where you can facilitate that storytelling, basically. And I know I've talked about kind of talk about that learning idea on Extreme E and how much I learned along the way. But this was a whole nother level, honestly. And like before we even started the recordings, we did a tour of the MTC, and I was just in like, oh, exactly. They actually asked, would you like one? I was like, quickly reply to the email. Don't you dare say no. Yeah, if I must. We were there and I was just in such awe of the kind of, as you can imagine, just the history of the cars around you and just seeing things in front of you that you'd only seen pictures of or whatever it might be. And we were chatting to Pauline McFerrin, who's the digital content motorsport lead at McLaren Applied after we'd finished the interviews kind of at the end of the week. And she said to me, oh, like, when I first met you, you know, you were pretty quiet. And I was kind of thinking like, how is she going to run a podcast and do a week full of interviews? Because she doesn't really say much. And I was like, yeah, look, it's a pretty hard ask to try and make me speechless. But walking in there, they managed it. Exactly. It was pretty amazing. But then in terms of the content that we were creating, I had the same experience, to be entirely honest. Obviously you're recording and you remember what you're there to do, but you know, there were stories that people were telling and I just had to stop myself from saying, you know, and then what happened? And then what happened? We need to keep these moving and kind of create some structure.
You kind of forget like your smoothness there was like, but I need to know what happened next, and you kind of forget
what happened next. What happened to the end? And then when did they leave? We never got to finish that story. Or they were just such fascinating people with such interesting stories. Again, such different backgrounds. And the panel that you mentioned in particular, you know, there were 4 people who do 4 completely different things, who do have a shared passion, but are bringing such unique perspectives to the business. And yeah, really, really cool experience. And I think at the end of the day, a really good product as well, which invites people in. And I think that's the big thing with motorsport in particular, but probably, you know, many other sports as well, and other businesses and entertainment and everything else, where people are starting to become a little bit more ready to kind of go, let's share our story. Let's get people in here and actually help them to understand who we are, what we do, and what we're trying to achieve. And I think this is a great platform to be doing it on.
No, definitely completely agree with that. And like you say, if you can keep opening the doors for these stories that we wouldn't normally get to hear, then all the better for it, because it feeds those, at the very least, die-hard motorsport fans even more then, because this is the stuff we've been wanting for years and years.
Yeah, exactly. Especially when you think about, you know, that interview with Nick Fry, we're like, it's the most famous dollar out there. Like, tell us the story. You all want to know. And he was fantastic, so fantastic, with sharing some of his personal experiences and professional experiences. And, you know, you could see how it's shaped him to be who he is. So yeah, no, there's some great stories in there. Everyone should definitely go and listen to it.
Potentially mean question for you, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Do you have a favorite personal motorsport moment from your work so far?
From work?
We'll keep it limited a little bit.
I've got plenty of favorite moments, but if from work, I think.
I say work like any of this comes across as work to me, but
no. I know what you mean. From creating content essentially, but yeah. So I think it has to have been that panel discussion that we did with McLaren Applied, and the reason why I say that is that there was something that felt really kind of personal and vulnerable about it. It was the first time many of them had done that type of thing. It was the first time I had done that type of thing. So there's something about a shared experience in there, I'm sure. Not that they knew that at the time. We told them afterwards.
Better that way.
Yeah. And I don't know, there was just something really special about having 4 such incredibly intelligent, just competent, wonderful women in one room talking about important stuff and sharing their stories. And there's something really special about that. And like I said, I think there is probably something there about having a shared experience in terms of, that being something pretty new for all of us. And they also trusted me with it, which is really important to me and not something that I take lightly, whereby it was a different situation for them in comparison to their usual working world, in terms of what they're comfortable with and their experience. And they trusted me to look after that. And that like I said, I take that really seriously. And I hope we're able to do them all proud and create something that really respects their abilities and their skills and their stories. So yeah, that's probably my work-related one. My non-work-related one was definitely at Montreal Grand Prix last year when Alonso came P2 in qualifying, and the whole crowd, like literally the whole crowd, Ferrari fans, McLaren fans, Mercedes fans, like in unison, just like belting out Alonso, like chanting. And when he took off his helmet, everyone just went absolutely wild. And I was like, you old dog, this is amazing. So that's my non-work related one, I think.
That's a great non-work related one, to be fair. It was,
I just couldn't believe it. It's one of those things where you're just surrounded by something, and especially when you get that kind of massive voices together.
So trying to get F1 fans to agree on stuff, but then Alonso P2, that's one of them.
They'll do it.
But it's one of them.
Yeah, 100%.
I think going back to the McLaren Applied thing, just one thing there is the curious thing with interviewing people and podcasting is that a lot of the time it's probably your first and possibly only interaction with these people. And like you say, they trusted you with their stories and with just opening up to you. And it's something that it probably isn't thought about an awful lot by people who watch or listen to these things, that they just assume everyone knows everyone wants your inside and you've got to these places and you're talking to these people. But like, no, you probably had no idea who these people were a month beforehand, probably even less before. So
we shook hands with them walking into the room, and that's it. But that's part of it. Like that's what's so challenging about a lot of this stuff, especially when you are doing kind of either like one-off series like that or whatever it might be. It's like you said, as opposed to having that kind of consistent or kind of repeat interactions and therefore building a relationship with someone, you need to make them feel immediately comfortable with you, so that they talk to you, they talk with you. And it's not about saying like, I need to get the most out of you or something like that. It's more kind of, I want you to have a great experience here. And I also want you to look back and say, I'm really glad I did that. And
that's the whole idea of, if they feel comfortable with you, they're more likely to open up and you get the good content that way, because then you can't force good content out of anyone. You need to have them feeling like they can open up and talk and do whatever and feel like it's, say you're at a pub and you're just having casual conversation. Yeah, it's safe.
And the thing is, like, sure, like content is absolutely part of it. Like that's what we're there to do. We need to create something that people are going to want to listen to and then keep listening to. And that's absolutely part of it. And that was important from a professional perspective. But from a personal perspective, I was like, I want every single one of these people to walk away and go, I'm really glad that I agreed to do this. That was a good experience. I've learned something from it. And I trust that what's going to be put out in the world will, be an accurate and respectful representation of what I bring to this company. Like that's what I wanted them to be able to walk away and say. And I really hope that that's the situation. But I think when you start putting the person back in the kind of the subject in front of you, that's when you, I don't know, and that will inevitably help you to get better content as well.
Keeping it on the kind of subject of women in motorsport, then, we've seen a lot of progress, both in terms of racing drivers and with people behind the scenes over the last few years or so. We've seen it with W Series. We've seen it with F1 Academy for this year. And then, like we were saying before, with McLaren Applied and with a bunch of other things, there are women there, but they don't just get the spotlight as much as they maybe should. And getting more and more of that. And I just kind of wanted to get your opinion on all of that and what more from your perspective could be done to kind of increase the encouragement of more women to get into motorsport, I think, because if we take F1 Academy and W Series, F1 Academy in particular is a nice idea. It's a shame it took this long for me on a personal level for it to be there, and potentially at the loss of W Series, because that's still very much up in the air at the moment. Probably now, as soon as I've said that, something will happen in a couple of days that will make this invalid.
That's the curse of the content. Yeah.
But yeah, I just want to get your thoughts on all of that, basically.
My thoughts on all of that. Like
I know.
It's a
that
big question.
Podcast series, I feel like
the future of women in motorsport. You tell me your idea. No, it's but it is a massive question, right? Like it's
you have 10-word answers
because it's huh?
You have a 10-word answer.
10-word answer. No, that's not possible for me. I'm sorry. But anyone who knows me will say that's not possible. Hence the speechless thing being so uncommon. But
I was going to say that, and the fact that you've now got your own Freya's Friday podcast, just to
exactly. Now you all have to listen to me. But no, I think the reason why it's such a big question because it's so all encompassing. We're talking about series design, engineering, biology, social barriers, understanding this is politics. We're talking. There's such a massive range of factors that you have to talk about as long as you are talking about women in sport, women in any sport. But if we start with Formula One and thinking about the series itself, I mean, from the outset, actually, I think what's really important to say is with W Series, the mistake that I think we will make at this point is to judge it on its past in terms of going between 2019 and 2022, this is what you achieved, or even year by year going, this is where it was, and rather than looking at its potential. And because if you think about that in any other sport or business in its first year, it's never going to be perfect. It's never going to be what you think it's going to be. Does it mean that you throw it out the window? No, it means that you go, okay, yeah, we're not doing that anymore, or we're going to do this differently. But you go, what worked, what didn't, how do we need to tweak things? And I think that's just an important kind of, I suppose, caveat, as we're talking about the series in particular. But I think when it comes to W Series, we just need to figure out, well, who are we? It's that kind of that philosophical question of going, are we a feeder series? Okay, if we're going to be a feeder series, let's be an actual feeder series where if you win the championship multiple times in the world, looking at you, Jamie Chadwick, you have to progress. You have to progress. And so, okay, we're going to be a feeder series. Let's do that. Then you have to actually go and be a feeder series. What's an alternative? Alternative might be that they merge with an existing feeder series and they actually run kind of collaboratively, which would, I actually think, be the real progress, is to have them merge with an existing feeder series so that you have input coming from both male and female training. Or go, okay, this is actually a independent series in and of itself. This is going to be form in overtime into a women's championship. But it's just one of those things where you go like, or is this, it's that philosophical question or fundamental question of going like, who are we when it comes to W Series? What are we trying to be? How are we going to get there? But I think what's tricky is that it needs to have FIA, F1, Liberty Media, everybody else all in to create a proper plan for that series. And that's what I think it appears and feels like it's missing at the moment, because as soon as W Series said we've got funding issues and cut its last 3 races last year, everyone was like, F1 will come in. And I was like, nah, they're not. That's not going to happen, because they probably have their own agenda of probably, just throwing it out there, potentially trying to get their own rights on women's racing and that type of thing. So I doubt that they're going to come in kind of rescue that series, and their academy is probably going to create their own whatever. But as long as this exists, it needs to have a plan and try and understand what it's trying to be. And that's where I kind of go, if you're going to be a feeder series, act like one. But that is going to require having the FIA and Formula One on board with that, as well as Liberty Media, which I think is going to be just a massive hurdle to try and overcome. And I think if we ask that question, I was kind of talking about earlier, to say what's working, what's not working, what do we need to do differently? The pulling down the barriers for entry is something that's really, really working, because obviously there's no funding required from the drivers to be able to participate. That's working. That is getting people in who otherwise would not be able to enter a sport at this level. What's not working is that it still hasn't answered that question of where to from here. Again, you're Jamie Chadwick. What next? There's not really anywhere to go. Now she's going to go to the US. Exactly. Off to the US, and she's going to race an IndyCar. And you go, and she's the obvious example to use there. But I think if we start asking that question, but again, it doesn't mean you throw the whole thing out the window. You go, what do we need to improve on? What do we keep? Which are the parts of the recipe that's working? And what do I need to adjust?
I think that was the frustrating thing towards the tail end of last year, like you say, when they did cancel the last few races, was that there was obviously the optimism, however misguided, that F1 would come in and save it, even though it wasn't their responsibility to. And instead of doing that, they then announced the Do F1 Academy, and it's for some of the younger drivers, and that's great, and I'm very much up for that, because that's a whole great initiative there. I was for me, it kind of seemed like a bit of a missed opportunity where, like you say, good time to assess what worked and what didn't, and F1 come and say, we'll save you under these conditions, and we work together and we make something. And instead, you've kind of just had this whole thing of, well, we'll just leave them alone and we'll see what happens to them, and we're not responsible for that, so we can say we weren't to blame for it. And it doesn't feel like the right message when you come across and when you say, we've got F1 Academy now, and that's great. It's like, yeah, but you kind of already had a bit of that was ready-made, and you just had to iron out some kinks instead of starting from scratch. So it's frustrating in that way, but I get what you mean as well with what you were saying there, and they need to have their own incentive. But I think it's just, again, I know it's not as easy as all this, but it just seems very logical of what the solutions could have been there. And I don't know why they weren't, but maybe it's just naivety on my part.
Well, I think they've all got their own agendas, right? And I wouldn't mind betting that, like we're seeing with women's sport in, other sports, it's now becoming gradually over time a massive, massive market. And I think F1 is gradually seeing that. Not that it hasn't always been there, but they're now starting to understand it and potentially starting to better measure it as well. And I would say they're keeping an eye on the prize when it comes to their long-term kind of rights holding and everything else when it comes to single-seater women's racing. So I think it was probably, ultimately a very commercial decision rather than one that we would have loved to have, which is, please come and let these amazing women do these last 3 races and see the series through. It's just like you said, mate, I think, we share a naive
we need someone
optimism.
at top of F1 who's just happy to spend the purse strings a little bit.
Exactly. Just cancel the party and fund this series instead. Exactly. Like, it'll be a similar budget. Like,
take the money you save from the swimming pool in Miami and just put it in here.
Exactly. But that's it. I think that's what we struggle with so much, is you see the amount of money that gets thrown around in F1 and the budgets that we're talking about and everything else. And we're going, seriously? That's what we're talking about here, and they can't even finish their season. Like, I think that's where there is a lot of frustration from female drivers, supporters, people who are working for the teams, and everything else. And that's the thing. It's not just the drivers. It's everybody who's working on these cars and supporting them to get there and doing the data analysis, and the mechanics and everyone else who's been part of it who doesn't get to see it through. It's not just the person in the car. Obviously, it's what we're kind of talking about when it comes to in sport. But yeah, and then when it comes to the F1 Academy, I think that, to your point, you're going, in order to have the impact and achieve the goals that they're saying they want to, they need to figure out a way for it to be collaborative, because otherwise you're going to end up with two kind of parallel series, even though Academy's not a series. But and you kind of go, they're going to end up competing against each other, in which case one's going to buy the other one out and whatever else. Like, which again, you kind of go, what's the end goal here? It does, because that starts to not feel like it's actually about trying to advance women's motor racing careers at all. So I think when it comes to the academy side of things, the 150K driver buy-in, that's going to be hard. Like, it still might be minute in comparison to other series, but we've got to look at where we're coming from and the fact that that's still a hell of a lot of money for the vast majority of people.
150K more than they would have to pay normally if they were going to the W series. So
exactly. So why, if you're 18, you're starting to really stand out as a driver. Why would I go to the F1 Academy when I can go to W Series, not pay to compete, and probably be faced with the same issue at the end of both of them, which is nowhere to go. Now, they're saying that F1 Academy will be a feeder series in terms of going into Formula 3, Formula 2, and that type of thing. But that starts bringing into it the next question, which is around equipment. So we start talking about what are the things that need to happen to advance women's motorsport, and it's a big one. It's a big one when it comes to racing at their full potential. It's a big one when it comes to safety, when it comes to just understanding women's sport. Like they're saying, I think for F2, they're saying in 2024, they're going to build a chassis that is for all potential drivers. So that is one that that is suited for women and other drivers as well. I don't know what the plan is there. But again, like it was only in 2021 that they got female tailored race suits.
Yeah.
Like before that, they didn't even have their own race suits that were designed for their bodies. And that to me, that blows my mind that they didn't have that done before 2019 when they started racing. And you go, even then, they're redesigned off what they have made for male drivers. And that eventually gets to this point, which I know is going to sound really, I don't know, some people will like it, some people won't. But when it comes to women in sport, we have this narrative, which is we're not going to take you seriously until you start beating the men. And you're going to have to do it in the same equipment, by the way. So beat us at our game, in our game, with nothing that is designed, built, or set up for you to succeed in. So I think, first of all, we can start with, we can think about the academy, we can think about W Series and whether or not they're actually set up for success when it comes to progression of a motorsport career for a female. We can start thinking about the equipment when it comes to the cars, when it comes to trainers even. Do they know how to train female drivers in comparison to male drivers? Because it's going to be very, very different. There's no power steering in F2 and F3. And women's upper bodies are, while structurally similar, very different biologically. So that's going to require you to train differently. Tatiana Calderon talks about that, where she was like, the first trainer that she worked with was training her the same way that he had trained male drivers. And she was like, I can't do that. My lat development is very different. So, so training, cars, suits, everything that is there and is as important when it comes to, like I said, safety and performance as well. But I think with all of that said, you go, okay, we're starting to get a pretty solid idea as to what needs to be done at that level. Just do it. I think this is where we get tired of the talk as well. And let's not start a new initiative. Let's not start a new campaign. Let's not start a new thing. Just go and do it.
Like you were saying before, if this is working and this isn't, if we just take Formula 2 as the example there, like what needs to be changed here to make it more inclusive so that women can come in and be totally fine with everything coming on the same equipment and all the rest of it. How much is that going to cost? Write the check, go and do it, because they're going to come at some point. So just get on with it.
And just you've got the drivers, we've got Jamie Chadwick, we've got Tatiana Calderon, we have these and they're just a few. Let's talk about Jess over at Aston Martin. We've got great drivers to just do the thing. And I think that can be challenging. I think it does result in a lot of kind of skepticism when you have probably very well-intentioned new initiatives that come about and you go, it's another one. And you go, my perspective a lot of the time is that the more initiatives there are, the more the action is diluted. And I just go, just put the woman in the seat. Just put her in the role, whatever it is. Can we actually just start doing the thing? Can we say the plan and do it rather than talking about it?
The amount of times where something like this has come up and the reply from me has been the gif of Dobby from Harry Potter just hitting his head against a wardrobe. Oh my God, not again.
Exactly. And a lot of the time you're like, I feel like I've heard this before, actually. But so you talk about that. You talk about the academy, you talk about the equipment and stuff, and that's when you go, okay, so how are you going to find people to put in it? And that's when we start talking about grassroots action, I think. And so you kind of, I think when it comes to actually, to go back to your question about how do we actually get women into motorsport as drivers, but then also in other roles in motorsport and Formula One as well, in particular, potentially. I think it has to be a combination of that kind of top-down, bottom-up approach. And by that, I mean kind of sorting out your W series and your academy, which we've talked about, but then bottom-up grassroots, because we know that at the same age, female drivers don't have the same level of experience. They don't have the same karting experience. They don't have the hours. They don't have anything else. So we know that we don't have the same experience at the same age when it comes to male and female counterparts. And they've done that research. They know, like, that's fact. And the reason why I think it has to be kind of top and bottom, so to speak, is that you've got kids going, karting is fun, but what's the point in being good at it because I've got nowhere to go? So they need to be able to see action at the top. And like you said, you then need to start creating that activity at the local level in order to feed them in. But they have to see that there is a pathway, because otherwise it's just an expensive hobby. Like, that's literally what it comes down to. And if you look at a sport like AFL in Australia, or an AFLW, Aussie Rules, as you guys probably call it, which we don't call it in Australia, but anyway, they had, it must have been even like it was 2010, it was just after I finished school, they had a commission, AFL did a commission into the state of women's football in Australia. And they basically said, you need to start working towards, along with lots of other things, you need to start working towards the establishment of a national women's league. And then basically they started working on that, and they kind of said, oh yeah, like maybe by 2020 we'll have something in place. But the popularity of the sport within females grew at such a pace that they had to go, oh gosh, we're going to have to bring that forward. We've got to do something now. We need to do something, and we need to do it quickly, actually. We need to advance these plans, because there is so much noise and there's so much want for participation that's going to take too long.
It's one of those things, though, where I feel like the same with motorsport. They say they'll do all this stuff, and great, do that. And I kind of hope it is the same thing that happened with that Down Under, where it be here, where it's like it happens so quickly that they have no choice to do it quickly. And because they can as well. It's just they're taking their time with it for no apparent reason.
For no reason. And I think that's actually a really good point. You go, when you look at that, like, it shouldn't have kicked off until 2 years ago, but actually it was in 2017. So they brought the whole thing forward 3 years. And you go,
oh, funny, it is
so
doable.
You can do it. So they had, like, they did have some stepping stones. They had exhibition series and that type of thing, but they had the first game of an AFLW series on the 3rd of February. So today, so happy birthday, AFLW.
I timed these so perfectly.
That was in 2017. And I was at that game, and at Icon Park, and I will never, ever, 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 ever forget it. They had planned to put it at the Olympic Park Oval, which only holds 7,000 people, but because of the amount of seating that they were going to need, they had to upgrade it. They put it there. They had close to 25,000 people there. It was deemed a lockout. The CEO of the AFL had to go down there and basically address the thousands of people who were waiting outside the stadium and saying, like, we're so sorry, you can't come in. And when we say standing room only, it's probably, like, I think they overfilled the stadium. And it was that, like, kind of dusk match. Sun was kind of setting. We had, like, I think they have AC/DC playing as the Melbourne Demons came out with my team. And I, just talking about it now, have goosebumps and shivers. And there was a couple of things with it. One was that you go, wow, like, I'm experiencing something here. This is a moment, and it's really, really important. But also we've just proven so many things wrong. They filled a stadium. They had massive viewership on all of their platforms. And that excitement hasn't really dwindled, and they play local matches, they play stadiums, they play all of these in all of these different locations, and different sizes of, like I said, of stadiums and things like that. And I just go, it's got a long way to go. Salaries are pathetic. So it can only be considered a semi-elite sport because they all have to have jobs as well. And there's different rules, slightly different. There's not so much different rules, but like the ball's a bit smaller. Field is the same size, but then you've got slightly different out of bounds rules and stuff like that. Not all of that is good things. Some of it is, some of it isn't. But every year something gets better.
Mm-hmm.
Every single year something improves. They understand more about what it means to have women playing this sport. The trainers get better, the physios get better, because they're understanding that actually having a ball of this size is easier to bounce, but more difficult to do this with, which is why we're getting those injuries. And they learn something every single year, and the game just gets better and better. And when I played sport in middle school,
with it and learning,
exactly,
but you need to do it for the long haul, because otherwise you're not going to be able to you can't get those straight out the box year one or year two. You need to do that for however long. As long as it takes, essentially.
As long as it takes. And the thing is that the people who want to play are not, like, the numbers of the women who want to play are not dwindling. There's lines out the door, so you go, the want is there, the spectators are there, the players are there. You just have to keep making improvements. And again, we compare it to another business or entertainment or anything else. And these are your startup years, right? You're still figuring yourself out. You're still trying to get your operations right. You're trying to get communications right. Not everything is going to be perfect, but as long as each year is better than the last, then you're doing something right and you're going in the right direction. Progress is a direction. And I think that's really important. And that's something that motorsport needs to just remind themselves every now and then. But just to kind of finish that off, I think like I said, in terms of going how quickly that has moved. When I played sport in middle school, we had like a sports day where you learn to play footy, but that was it. And there was no point in being good
next year. It's next sports day.
Exactly. And you go, well, there's no point in trying to be good at this, because why? Like, there's no team. So why am I going to bother trying to be good at this? It just means that I can go and kick a footy in the backyard with anybody else. Great. That's all I need to know how to do. By the time I got to uni, there were all girls leagues between most of the schools. This is in Victoria by that stage. Most schools would have had a team. And when I was at uni, I then had to borrow somebody else's soccer boots, because all of a sudden there was a college team. And I was like, holy shit, I want to play footy. And so I went and played a couple of games of footy by the time I was at the end of uni. And then by the time I was working, one of my cousins works in local footy, we'll do some coaching and stuff. And I said to him, I was like, oh, do you have is there much interest or engagement with having a women's team? And he goes, oh, we've got 2 women's teams and a waiting list like you wouldn't believe. And I went down for a couple of them, and they were packed. And you're going, like, this is incredible. And that's all been in, I don't want to say my lifetime, that's been between my later school years, basically.
Undisclosed age bracket.
Exactly. So, it's in a far more reduced period of time. But what I loved about that is that it's happened. I don't say it happened quickly. It hasn't happened quickly, because women have always found ways to play footy, but there wasn't a pathway for it. And in a way, you could say there still isn't, because you can't live off the 20 grand a year or whatever it is that they get paid in comparison to the 350 to 400 that the men get paid.
Only a slight disparity.
A small disparity there. But at the same time, you go, but it is progress. And like I said, if every year you do something different, then you're going in the right direction. But the other thing which I liked about it is that there wasn't this kind of we're going to try and find the first female football player or something like that. And I was like, sure, having a woman go and playing football on a world stage, whatever it might be, might prove a point about capability. But what they are doing with AFLW is actually trying to understand the whole thing. And now they're kind of going, look, is
looking for a female one. It kind of goes back to we'll do it for the sports day, and that's it, to prove we can do it, and then we won't do it again for another year.
And then we won't do it again. Exactly. And what happens? And you apply that to F1, and they've kind of, you've got the more than equal thing in terms of trying to find the first female F1 driver. And again, I go okay, sure. As far as initiatives go, I'm not going to be against it, because I think it's a good thing. At the same time, I have this question about, does it dilute action? And what happens when you find one? Do we give you a gold medal and we say we can do it? We can do it too, and we all move on. Are you looking for it? And the thing is that we go back to what we were talking about before, in terms of going series, equipment, grassroots, whatever. what you're looking for at the moment is somebody who, if you were to find the first F1 driver next year, you're looking for someone who has overcome all of that, and despite not having the equipment that is suitable for them, despite not having funding, despite not having this, they've still made it. So you
and
are
even
looking
that they have to have a hell of a good first season to even stay in after that for more than 1 year.
Exactly. So they do one race and we found one, and then they say, there, we did it. So I know I'm probably being a bit, I don't know, brash, but my point is, I want to look at the bigger picture, and I want them to look at the bigger picture. And there's something about that message which doesn't sit well with me. I would rather hear them say, we want to understand women's racing. That to me is a much better message for me. And not everyone will agree with me. That's absolutely okay. We can have a really good conversation about it. But
so this could turn into its own podcast series, I feel like.
Exactly. But I think it's so important that we have this conversation, because I think, there's just there's a lot of initiatives, there's a lot of ideas, everything else. And I think I'm kind of going, okay, cool, that's great. Can we just do the thing now?
No, definitely. And
sorry, that wasn't 10 words or less.
No. But like you said, looking at the bigger picture, then I want to kind of use your knowledge here of some people that we might not know about, because like you say, it's all about trying to build these connections to get people aware of all these other people in the first place, so that there can be more people in the discussion. And when people then are looking for other people to bring up and give these opportunities to, that they can all get a fair shake of the stick at. So again, potentially mean question, 1 or 2 people that you think that that we might not know about, who we should know.
This is a really hard one. Really hard. Partially because I would say, I'm still growing in the motorsport community. And so not as on, don't know that many people basically, but I do look to who do I follow, who do I think is doing interesting works, and rather than kind of individual people, because I think a lot of these things are combinations of people and producers or whatever else, who are all making something happen. But I love what Fem Speed are doing. So they've got, it's basically an online kind of motorsport community where everybody from whatever background can come together to talk about creating an equal future in motorsport. And I think I like how they're kind of trying to draw attention to, whether it's jobs that are going out there. So they're, highlighting teams that are hiring or promoting internships that are open. They are doing profiles on young drivers, or up and coming drivers, and people who are behind the scenes roles as well. And I just really like that activity of trying to bringing things all to one place, where it's easy to find.
Like you say, build that strong foundation for everyone to be able to look at then. Yeah,
because I think the tricky thing is, and you read this in a lot of kind of interviews and things, of people who are now established in motorsport and Formula One in particular. And it's like, I just didn't really know where to go for information, and there's all these connections and I didn't know about it. Or like, then I turned out that this was, and now people are doing a much better job, I think, of actually advertising things much more openly and that type of thing. But I think a platform like that, is just really beneficial when it comes to trying to simplify for people who are not going to find it as easy to get involved or find that first step. So showcasing other people who are working in the sport, making the opportunities that are open obvious for people, or easier to find for people, and then obviously encouraging people along the way when it comes to positive messaging and that type of thing. So there's lots out there, honestly, who are doing.
I'll tag as much of that as I can when I promote this.
We're doing really great work. But that's one that comes to mind. And yeah, like I said, there's lots of others, but that's just one that I see that I always kind of think like, yeah, you're doing good stuff.
So 2023, we're somehow only a month into it, and yet already a month into it. But I'm going to ask the cheeky question now. And are there any plans that you can reveal of what you're up to for this year?
We will be up to lots of things, and it's all going to be a lot of fun. I think no, we will. But what do I would say? Actually, we actually have an episode coming out next week on Tuesday, which is going to be a great interview with someone who I really respect and look up to in Formula One world. So, and there'll be more of that to come. So we can have a taste of it on Tuesday, and then there'll be more of that. But look, I think for 2023, meet lots of interesting people, tell some great stories.
I'll take that, I suppose. Now, it's fair to say that the Extreme Podcast and McLaren Applied Podcast could fit into this next question, but you've already done them, so you can't use them. So I want to see rather, what would a dream motorsport job look like for you, if you have any idea of what that would be?
Do you know what? I think if you ask me this question at like different times of day, you'll get very different answers. Because of my academic background, from a psychology perspective, I think if you asked me at certain times of day when I'm really in that kind of zone of thinking about the human condition, I'd be like, it's all about performance, and I would love to be a performance coach and those types of things, which is still something that I think one day I might venture into. So if you ask me at a certain time of day, you'll get that answer. At another time of day, I'd say love doing presenting work and getting on camera and speaking to people and having fun when it comes to helping people to tell their stories and also bringing information to an audience. But then first thing in the morning, I'm like, exactly. But then first thing in the morning, I'm like, nah, that's probably not going to be great for me. I'll just stick to podcasting so I can keep the camera off. But no, look, I think but I genuinely mean that. And I think that's one of my challenges sometimes is that it's that classic, what's the saying? Jack of all trades. What is it? It's like
Jack of all trades, but master of none.
Master of none. That's me. My mediocrity at all things just has no limits. But I'm so interested in so many different things and how it all works. And so on one side of it, I'm thinking about drivers and performance, and it's like, oh yeah, I'd love to get more involved in that. Then another times I love content creation, media, and bringing information to people ultimately. So I go, right, that's something that I want to do. And then other times it's something else. It's tricky because I'm interested in how the whole organism kind of, comes together. But I think ultimately the thing which has led to me doing all of the things that I've done to this point in various points of my various careers has always been about storytelling and helping people, being part of helping people to tell that story. So I think anything that involves that is something that's always going to bring me a lot of kind of joy and fulfillment. And so that's why I'm loving what we're doing at the moment. And in particular, I love doing the interviews and stuff that we do, because there's something to me, like I said earlier, about facilitating, and that's really how I see it, in terms of just being the one to help to bring out these incredible experiences that people have. And that's something I think is really special and privileged as well. So as long as that's part of it, I think it's something that I'll always really enjoy. So again, not a 10 word answer for you. But people, stories, that's me.
I love it, to be fair. I don't mind the long answers when they're like that. So I can definitely work with that. Yep. But I will probably get some shorter answers from you now, because this is literally what these questions are designed for. So let's see if you can work your way around that.
Challenge accepted.
It's some fun questions to finish off, one of which is motorsport related. So as I say, 2023, at the moment, we're still very much in the off season. So what I want from you is one F1 prediction, one Extreme prediction, and then probably the trickiest one of all, one Lakeside Drive prediction for 2023.
I don't even know what that means. Nothing about Lakeside Drive is predictable. Okay. F1.
It can be as mad as you want it to be. It doesn't have to be an accurate prediction, mind you. It can be a dream if you want it to be.
Okay, we're starting with the dream. We will see Daniel Ricciardo back on track in 2023. If we're talking about a wild prediction, Charles Leclerc is going to leave Ferrari at the end of the year.
Ooh. Go somewhere else, or are we just leaving that up in the air for a minute?
No, we'll leave that up in the air. That's
Okay.
wild. It can go anywhere. Extreme E. Extreme
Again,
E.
pretty unpredictable, but I'm being mean, so here we are.
Yeah, again, nothing predictable about that sport either. I think Apt Cooper will win the championship next year.
Oh, I would like that.
That's my prediction.
I can very much get on board with that prediction.
They did phenomenally well. They're a very entertaining team to watch. So I'm here for it.
If for no other reason, just to see Carlos Sainz Senior's face when NASA does it to him in Extreme.
Can you imagine? But then there's a big part of me that wants him to have success, because I feel like last year, well,
he can win a race or two. Maybe it's just really close on points,
Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, that's where I'm going with it. I think the sneakiness sometimes of Nasser I find very endearing. And just his attitude afterwards.
He always has that look on his face of just like, yeah, I tried that, but I got away with it, so it's fine.
He's like, oh, you cut me off. I'm like, that's not what I expect you to say there. And he's like, just has this kind of, just it doesn't seem to
doesn't bother him at all.
Bother him, doesn't land on him. It's like, anyway, so there's something about that I find quite endearing. Lakeside Drive prediction. Oh my God, I don't even know where to start with this. You're asking me to do the impossible. Lakeside Drive prediction.
Genuinely, still, I've managed to do what the MTC did. I've made her speechless.
Lakeside Drive does make me speechless on a regular basis, because I can't often believe what's happening in front of me.
Why do I feel like that's not as much of a compliment as it was for the McLaren Ducati season?
Believable and yet unbelievable. Lakeside Drive. This is a tough one. I'm trying to think about it. I mean, the obvious one is to say that Tommy won't write back to a single one of my messages, but that's not a prediction. That's just past predicting the future. And guaranteed. So, well, to be fair, I had two
maybe
wild
go in the opposite
ones,
direction with that, and
say
he will reply to something.
Exactly. Oh, you've got me stumped there. The other Lakeside Drive prediction is that Campy's going to get absolutely owned in karting when they do take on the box of neutral guys. So
I really hope there's some kind of video recording of that for us to watch at some point.
I'm sure there will be.
I'll let you have that then, and I'll go on to a couple of I'm nothing if not a little merciful. Have a couple of non-motorsport related questions then. What's one thing that Australians do better than the Dutch, and vice versa?
Well, one thing Australians do better than anybody is humour. So they have that over the Dutch as well. And the Dutch over Australia, which is very easy to do, to be fair, is probably food. But honestly, there is no besides a meat pie, there is no Australian cuisine. And people go, pavlova. It's like, well, technically that's probably from New Zealand. Barbecues. It's like, yeah, but everybody does barbecues. Like everyone puts it, so I don't think there's a lot and much that is original about Australian food. So I'm saying the Dutch do that better. Like they've got great cheese, the stroop waffles, their fries are just the best with mayo. Anyway, so yeah, there's something very special about Dutch fries. Vlaamse frites, very good. So anyway, it's funny because I'm both Dutch and Australian, which is I assume why you're asking that question. But
I do my homework.
Yeah, exactly. But so I'm kind of going, I feel like I'm kind of not being kind to one of my ancestors at some point here. But to be honest, it's actually not such a difficult one. What annoys me is that the Dutch are the quote unquote tallest people in the world. My family is so short. Not one of us is over 6 foot. And, I stand at a grand height of 165 centimeters. And I was like, you just skipped us, or something. Like, I don't know. So I
The
think I'm
silver
maybe a
lining
bit of
for that would
resentment
be
there.
that you don't have any trouble fitting in an F1 car if the opportunity arises.
That is true. That is true. I am
So
the
again,
same height as
we saw
guys.
we saw the video you posted again on your story the other day of you having a look inside the one in McLaren. It's like, yep, try to sneak you in there, and you could fit. So
I reckon I could definitely fit in there. Although I will say that their hips do look considerably narrower than mine. When I actually looked at the cockpit, I was like, "What? I might be your height, but I'm definitely got." My width is definitely more significant.
Well, there's just even more of an excuse for you to be the one to help test out for the media for the 2024 F2 cars.
I think that's sorted. Yeah, I completely agree. That is some great logic that can't be argued with.
Final question then: what is the best film you have ever seen?
I can't choose between two here. There are two. They are excellent. The first one is Point Break.
Okay.
And the second one is The Replacements.
Okay. Interesting choice for both of them.
What's interesting about them?
No, I just find it interesting. That's not a negative thing. That's just Well, no, because you hear some
interesting. That's what one of my lecturers used to say when you're wrong. So
I survived long in this interview with getting away with stuff, and you get the last one.
They said they'd kind of go, so tell us about why this has come about based on what you've learned today, blah blah blah. And someone will say, well, it's because of this, and they go, interesting. Next, and then someone else will go, oh, because of this, and she'd be like, interesting. Who else has any ideas? And basically, interesting meant you're wrong. So I'm intrigued
to save
by
myself from this,
your assessment of my answer.
Was normally you hear some of these older more classical films of I don't know. I'm drawing blanks on everything now, but you hear Godfather as an obvious example.
Are you saying that Point Break is not a classic?
I see. Okay, it's all kinds of trouble here. I'm saying it's not an ordinary answer. I'm glad it was a different answer, and that is why it is interesting. Although maybe I should have said fascinating.
It's different. It's unusual.
All right. We're just gonna end the podcast now.
Well, it might be different, interesting, and unusual, but it's also my answer.
That's perfectly fine. I was never saying anything bad about it. On that note, I will thank you very much for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure chatting with you, genuinely. Not saying that trying to save face now, genuinely mean it. And very much looking forward to, I was going to say seeing what you get up to this year, but probably more hearing most of it, because that's
might be a bit of seeing too. We'll see.
Coming out of the shell a little bit. Good to know.
Yep.
Yeah. Best of luck for everything in 2023 anyway.
Thank you. You too as well. Look forward to everything, amazing content that you're putting out, and can't wait to see where it takes you.
Thanks again to Freya for coming onto the Kerbs with me. As you can tell, I'm definitely a fan of hers, so I'm very much looking forward to seeing and hearing what she gets up to in 2023. If you want to follow Freya's career, links to her socials will be in the description below, so do go and check those out. Join me again next time when I'll be chatting to another famous face from the world of motorsport. In the meantime, don't forget to like, comment and subscribe, as well as check out the back catalogue of episodes on the On the Kerbs channel. If you want even more from me, you can listen to me chat about everything Formula 1 over on the Undercut Podcast, as well as delving into the world of Nitro Rallycross over on the Nitro RX Podcast. Both are available wherever you get your podcasts. As for written content, I currently write for Is It Fast, Paddock Sorority and Paddock Passion, so be sure to check all of them out with original pieces released each week. All of the information and links for those will be in the description below, as well as my Instagram and TikTok handles if you want to go and follow me there. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll be back soon with another episode.